Good evening. For this discussion, we are to provide our thoughts on the freedoms that we have or take granted for in daily life and how they translate into cyberspace, and then what cultural considerations impact these freedoms. So while on f.org, I kind of dove deeper into COVID-19 and the digital rights behind it and how it's kind of impacted our freedom of speech. And so I kind of just was reading up on the surveillance. Basically, the government wanted to beef up surveillance just to see, to keep track of people who were tested positive and if they were outside and what they were doing. And they wanted to have face recognition, a lot of things that would invade our privacy. And there were a few things that we kind of opposed, which was, like I said, the face recognition and thermal imaging. And then obviously monitoring our quarantine with GPS ankle shackles, which kind of seems like house arrest, basically is house arrest, and tracing our phone location data. So there were a lot of things that our government couldn't necessarily pinpoint why these things were necessary, like why we needed GPS tracking on our phone, because that necessarily wouldn't tell you if somebody tested positive or not. You would be able to see if somebody went to a protest or anything like that. And so one of the main things I think a lot of people are concerned with, like our data privacy and like our amendment to freedom of speech, but like reading up on this article, government transparency was the main thing for me. I think during COVID, it was a lot of things going around, and I think one of our previous discussions around fake news really kind of sparked my my interest in COVID-19, because there was a bit of fake news going around COVID, but it also wasn't as much government transparency as we would hope for. And so one of my thought processes behind our freedom of speech is our government kind of needs to be transparent, especially with cyberspace. It seems like they're trying to put a lot of restrictions online and what we can do, what we can't do, or just tracking what we do. And there was one thing that I had read in the article. It basically said if a lot of these things went into effect or went into play, it wouldn't be anything for the government to just switch the use of all of these, all of our, what's the word? All of their surveillance. It would be easy for them to switch it for political use rather than COVID-19 and public health use. It'd be easy for them to already just implement a lot of these in-place surveillances and switch it to for political gain and political use. And then it would just completely just take over our First Amendment. And I think that the cultural implications with that, a lot of things online, I think back to when I took cyberspace, intro to cyber psychology, my first semester, PSY510. I read up on an article, and there was a situation, I think it was in Saudi Arabia. A lot of the women's rights were just, they weren't able to drive, they weren't able to vote. And this was brought onto Twitter, like just to share to the world what was going on. And I think that other cultures, their lack of freedom of speech, they are kind of inspired or brought together or feel safe in online environments by a lot of U.S. citizens, the people who speak up, a lot of people who use their platforms to speak to social injustices, or people who are activists, things and such like that. I think that cyberspace sometimes in the real world, in our physical presence, we don't necessarily speak up as much as we would online because of the lack of barriers online, as well as the factor of anonymity. If I could create a fake profile and I could speak to social injustices, I would feel a lot more safe, and I would create a platform and a space for others to also use their voice. So I think that sometimes I wouldn't say we necessarily take for granted our freedom of speech, but we feel a lot more safe to speak freely online. But there's pros and cons to that, because with anonymity comes with people saying harmful things online. Although we do have freedom of speech, those things can harm others, and some people might not. I think it's open for interpretation. Like, if I say something that I feel like is not as harmful, it's just a harmless little joke, but that person sees it as me, it's defamation of their character. I think it's open for interpretation, but I think that's one of the cultural implications with freedom of speech.